Good afternoon and welcome to episode 6 of Inside Out, a monthly webcast where Thinka's co-founders and respective COO and CEO, Ben and Lee, talk through all the weird and wonderful, hard and human parts of business and leadership. This month, it's a special focus on women in leadership, and we're focusing on one big question. Are Australian women in leadership roles redefining success? Or are they still navigating a system built for men?
Interestingly, we've got half of our workforce being women, but we've still got women being underrepresented in leadership positions, so especially in more senior positions. So we've only got 34% of board members being women, and 1 in 4 boards have no women at all. So we're seeing what Melbourne Business School has described as a seniority drop-off. So the further you kind of move up the ladder in leadership, the less likely you are to receive those opportunities to be promoted into seniority. And interestingly, women are half as likely to be sponsored for a more senior executive position in an organisation. So we just kind of want to set the scene today about the stats in Australia and what they look like. And while there's better representation, I guess, in more frontline and middle management positions when it comes to women in leadership, it definitely takes a bit of a turn the more senior you are.
The design of work structures, I would actually say by men versus for men. And the reason I would say by men is because, unfortunately, work structures, or the standard of good, I often like to say, often has become the measuring stick in which we now all use. And it's actually not fair for all the people that are represented within work. Because once upon a time, men were the only ones working. So in the capacity of what we would now deem as work, don't get me wrong, when you have a look at the statistics around the role women have played historically and the amount of unpaid work they do now, it's a complete misrepresentation of history. History was written by men, for men. Lee, to your point before.
About men.
But to not go down that rabbit hole, I just want us to come back to, rather than falling into the trap of, one, thinking the work is done, but two, using the same old measuring stick to measure something that we know is now different, is really important. A job role is out there and there are different candidates applying for it, and one works flexibly and one works within an office context. Let's not lose sight of who's producing the best results for that role that they're both going for. One person may be able to achieve the same impact in a flexible working arrangement. Just because we have told ourselves that they are available, or this other person is available more of the time and they're visible more of the time, doesn't make them right for the role. That's just our perception on what good work ethic is.
There still is this pervading perception that if you're a part-timer or you engage in flexible work, you might be leaving the office early to pick your children up from school, as an example, and getting on later at night, where people don't see the kind of extra bit that you do to compensate for that. Or, you actively engage in a part-time engagement. There's this perception that you're not right for leadership because you don't have kind of the amount of hours to dedicate to it, or you're not ambitious, or like you've got to balance your time between work and either family and home or caring responsibilities. So, you kind of don't fit that stereotype of what a good leader is. And I think that's the bit we need to change, which you've already alluded to, Benny, about breaking down structures and rebuilding them.
Maybe our view on that actually isn't right. We should be advocating for, and we had a question coming into this, how do I make sure that I, can communicate effectively and not being seen as too alpha or not being seen as too assertive in that moment as well? Who needs to change in that moment? Yes, we can all regulate our communication style, but do we also need to view differently that communication styles that are maybe sometimes more assertive or sometimes more alpha, that we're not gendering it as well and going, oh, that's discounting that person's suitability to the role.
Yeah.
Sometimes we viewed, getting ahead as being the person who can exhibit command and control when the time is right, or can be forthright in advocating for a certain policy position or whatever it might be. That was considered the standard. Oh, that's what we need from this senior leadership. That's the type of thinking. Maybe we need to ask a different question in the way we now measure what good looks like from a leadership perspective. How flexible are they in their style? How able to adapt? Because we've created this view on what good looks like, but was that the right view? And how do we now change that to actually go, what we need at the table are people that can augment our culture not just fit our culture.
Interestingly, the research goes further to talk about we don't just have a glass ceiling, we have a glass cultural ceiling as well. So it's not just about women in leadership, women with different cultural backgrounds. It's really important to see what they're bringing to leadership teams as well, because oftentimes they're multilingual. They're bringing in a whole lot of the ability to navigate different cultural contexts. They have more ability to be able to read the play and to work cooperatively with people because they've generally had to navigate situations their entire life where they've had to do that.
These brilliant women that you've just mentioned, who have got all of this experience in not just maybe the technical parts of the job role, are probably more qualified most of the time and more able to do the role, but get looked over. And it's like, I'm really frustrated by the fact that women have to feel like they have got everything. They've got 95%, and this is the statistics around this. Like they have to be able to look at a job role or promotional advancement and go, yep, I can do all bar one thing on that piece of paper. I'm good to go. And men will look at it and go, oh, I've only got 50% of that. I'm good to go. And it frustrates me sometimes that it's like the measuring stick even that women put on themselves is different. When we're hiring or when we're promoting or when we're looking at this standard of good or the standard of what is fair or what work ethic looks like, we often fall into this trap of lazy hiring or promoting based on will there be traditional structures or are they right for the role? But we often view life experiences as a negative. So someone has had a couple of years off to travel and take a career gap, we'll question the gap in their resume. Someone's been out of the workforce for a few years, maybe they've started a family, which is an amazing thing. There are so many experiences in both of those things that actually add to who that person is, their identity, that actually should be celebrated, not seen as a negative. It's like, my God, tell me the mum who has stayed home and looked after the kids during those early years hasn't learned a whole heap of new skills during that time. It's going to make them a better leader. And it's like, I just think we sometimes look at things with the wrong lens.
What do we do now? Like, if we can't change the structure or the system, what are the things we can change? And I do think it starts with challenging decisions. Like, if we can see laziness there, if we can see bias, call it out and not being afraid to. And that goes for both women and men in leadership positions. And it doesn't necessarily have to be just in leadership. Like, developing a culture where people feel safe to challenge things, I think is really important. Some other suggestions would be having a bias buddy could be another really good one. So typically when we hire here at Thinka, we have two people go along and that second person really does act as that bias buddy, that person that checks and vets for bias and really considers all of the different people from an equitable perspective. What culture add can they bring? What are the skills and qualifications relative to the role, and what is it they need to learn and upskill in, and how does that sit with what we're looking for and the salary, etc. And building that picture in a very fair and equitable way. And I think we were talking about this earlier around this idea of minority stress, that they're often working 10 times harder or have much greater qualifications or experience, voluntary or whatever it is, to fulfill those roles. But the yardstick is different because they're a minority. So they feel they have to achieve that in order to be at the place that is on par with men, if we're talking about women as an example. And I'm just thinking about my own experience and the various qualifications that I've pursued, the amount of learning I do in my own time in order to feel justified that I can fulfill the requirements of a CEO role. Like, would a man work that hard? I don't know. It's just a thought. And maybe that's a good point around that, how as women we navigate high pressure roles. It's just releasing a little bit of expectation. Maybe it's about just saying, you know what, I don't have to put in that extra 10% because probably, that extra 10% is beyond what a counterpart might put in place in the same position simply because they hold themselves to a different standard.